He rode over TV screens for years as the ideal hero. Then abruptly, in 1952, Clayton Moore left the program. Nobody was aware of the reason. Was there cash involved? Did it have control? The substitute actor was a complete failure. Moore never mentioned what had transpired when he returned. A startling lawsuit then attempted to permanently remove his mask in the 1980s. The actual guy who created the Lone Ranger engaged in far more sinister combat than any of the show's antagonists. In Chicago, Jack Carlton Moore was born on September 14, 1914. He was one of 3 sons and the youngest. Charles, his father, was a broker in real estate. Despite the Great Depression, the family had a stable income. Even though many families were losing everything, the Moores possessed a vacation property in Canada and a live-in maid. Because of such comfort, young Jack had the freedom to imagine and explore, something that most children do not have. Instead of pursuing his father's dream of becoming a doctor, Jack was drawn to difficulties including performance and physicality. He had already changed as a child. He started performing in circuses at the age of 8. He worked hard at his training. He wasn't merely having fun. While other children played and swam on summer vacations to Canada, Jack was performing gymnast-style flips and hanging from trees. It was a success. By the time he turned 19, he was a member of the Flying Bears, a professional trapeze troupe. He was more than a performance. He was responsible for catching people in midair. It was challenging and risky, but he thrived on it. 1934 saw the opening of the Chicago World's Fair. Millions of people gathered to witness the future, and Jack Moore was there, performing far above the audience. He performed daily, captivating spectators with his strength and accuracy. It wasn't merely amusement. It was publicity. People became aware of him. He showed more than just his flips to talent scouts. The charisma and camera-friendly visage were visible to them. He entered the world of modeling as a result. Moore got a contract with the John Robert Powers Agency in New York. It was a significant event. At the time, Powers was a leading modeling agency. Moore was the ideal fit because of his broad eyes, powerful jawline, and tall stature. His face appeared in advertisements, catalogs, and periodicals until the late 1930s. He was the quintessential American. He made money and made industry contacts through modeling. However, there was still a gap. The pictures were quiet. Jack was eager to relocate. It was a bold move on his part in 1938. After leaving New York, he traveled to Hollywood. He had just hope and a portfolio in anticipation of a significant role. And his prowess. He took anything he could in those early years, including stunt jobs, minor parts, and background roles. Others voiced their displeasure, but Moore saw it as training. He observed the actor's delivery of lines. He became familiar with camera motion. He was aware of presence, timing, and illumination. Slowly, he recovered. The year 1940 then arrived. They brought in a producer, Edward Small. Though he felt Jack's name was too simple, he appreciated his talent and appearance. So Jack turned into Clayton Moore. It wasn't only branding that led to the name change. This was a change. At this point, Clayton Moore thought he was destined for the screen. He completely accepted the new identity that it offered him. Clayton and Mary Frances were married in the same year. Along with Mary's mother, they took a plane to Las Vegas for the wedding. A glamorous elopement in Hollywood. But it was short-lived. Their divorce was finalized less than 2 years later. There were divergent poles in their life. Later, she appeared in a serial of science fiction. He was about to make his breakthrough. Clayton was cast by Republic Studios in Perils of Neoka in 1942. It was really popular. He portrayed Dr. Larry Grayson, who scaled walls, flew horses, engaged in combat, and even operated on people's brains in caverns. Clayton made it plausible even though it was excessive. There was sincerity in his expression. He accomplished the stunts using his body. At the time, the expense of making that serial was high $175,010. But it was worthwhile. Moore immediately established himself as Republic's next big serial hero, surpassing even Buster Crabbe, as he shone his star power. Moore put his rapidly advancing career on hold to serve in World War II. In the same year, Moore enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Force. Despite having a knee injury from his time as a trapeze artist, he was not sent overseas and continued to contribute significantly to the war effort. Following his training in Texas, he was assigned to Kingman, Arizona. He created and organized entertainment for the troops there using his showbiz expertise. Although they ridiculed him about his roles and many of the soldiers knew him from his films, they still respected him. Afterwards, he produced training movies like Target and Invisible with the 1st Motion Picture Unit, which helped American airmen get ready for battle. He even stayed at the base of the unit in Culver City, California. Although Moore's service wasn't particularly active, he was proud of the impact he made. In July 1945, he received an honorable discharge. During his time in Arizona, something far more intimate also occurred. Moore used a phone call from the military post to pop the question to his girlfriend, model Sally Allen. Without hesitation, she agreed. She even relocated to be with him in the middle of the desert. Theirs endured, although that type of quick-paced wartime romance was typical in the 1940s. They were wed for 43 years until Sally died in 1986. She was more than just Moore's ally. She joined in on his prepared events and became a part of the base's morale. Later, those who worked with Moore claimed that his devotion to Sally served as a reminder of his fidelity as the Lone Ranger. Moore wasted little time after the war. With a direct focus on westerns, he immediately returned to film. During 1946 and 1947, he worked constantly. His writing abilities impressed well-known people like Gene Autry and Roy Rogers. Moore appeared in a number of movies, including 5 Gene Autry productions: Riders of the Whistling Pines, 1949, Sons of New Mexico, 1950, The Cowboy and the Indians, 1949, and Barbed Wire and Night Stage to Galveston, 1952. Working with big stars was one of the amazing experiences he gained from these. His role as a masked hero in the 1946 film The Crimson Ghost, albeit uncredited, was an early indication of things to come. He also made cameos on programs like The Range Rider and The Gene Autry Show. These parts contributed to the development of the tough yet kind persona that would come to characterize him. Next came the part that truly showcased his versatility. Portrayed Jesse James in the 1947 film Rides Again. It was filmed for less than a month and cost $180,497. Moore's Jesse was more than a lawbreaker. He was a man who aspired to be good. Viewers were captivated. The character felt genuine because of his intensity, quickness of draw, and lethal edge. So powerful was the performance that Republic Pictures immediately commissioned a sequel. Moore made a comeback in April 1948 with Jesse James and Adventures of Frank. The budget for that one was $149,985 and it was shot in just 21 days. The acrobatics were exciting, and even though Tom Steele wrote a lot of the material himself, he handled the riskiest passages. Most Republic serials had 15 chapters, thus these two 13-chapter serials were out of the ordinary, but they were successful. Moore's ability to play a multi-layered hero and lead a franchise was demonstrated. George W. Trendle, the creator of the popular radio version, was searching for a way to bring his masked hero to the big screen in 1949. Not just any actor would do for him. Someone who embodied justice itself in appearance, movement, and voice was what he needed. "I am the Lone Ranger, Mr. Trendle," said Clayton Moore as he entered the audition. That self-assurance wasn't a lie. Moore was ideal for the part because he had the kind of athletic background and had already made an impression in Ghost of Zorro. By the age of 20, he had performed at the Century of Progress Expo and lived in Chicago as a trapeze artist. Wasn't acting when the first program aired on ABC on September 15, 1949. Lone Ranger was his name. But a startling thing occurred. Despite Moore's deep, rich voice, Trendle didn't think it was appropriate. He wanted Moore to have the voice of the radio's brace beamer. Moore wasn't upset. He worked hard with a voice coach, practicing until he could match every rhythm and tone. Trendle was still not content. In 1950, he threatened to replace Moore after warning producers that the latter was deviating too much from Beamer's style. Moore, however, persisted. Fans adored the audio and video versions of his voice for years after he completely changed it. What was the outcome? He created an iconic voice and made the switch from radio to television seem natural. One individual wasn't the focus of the show. The Lone Ranger was a hit when it first out on television. The ratings were really high. The 7th in 1950 to 51. In 1951 and 1952, number 18. Additionally, number 29 in 1952 to 1953. But what really set it apart was Moore and Jay Silverheel's collaboration. Tonto was portrayed by Silverheels, a true native actor, marking a significant shift at a time when white performers typically don makeup for such roles. Although Tonto continued to speak in halting English, Silverheels offered him respect. Fans took note. Tonto and the Ranger, they claimed, were not master and servant. They were on a level playing field. People were moved by that notion. Behind the scenes, however, things weren't quite that equal. With a $2,500 incentive, Silverheels made $150 per week in 1951. Even though his weekly income had increased to $650 by 1954, it was still less than Moore. Even so, their relationship made the play memorable, and it was timed perfectly. Families flocked around the TVs that were appearing in homes all around America to witness the masked guy and his companion ride into action. Moore looked the part, but he accomplished more. It was his life. He was the one who trained the horse, Silver. On TV, he did his own stunts, including wrestling, leaping, and galloping, in each episode. Even decades later, Moore would publicly display his abilities, exciting fans while he spins his Colt .45s. He was still the Lone Ranger, quick, and in good shape at the age of 71. The Ranger never fired to kill, only to disarm, as he frequently reminded supporters. Moore believed in that, and it was part of the code. Then, in 1952, the unimaginable occurred. Suddenly, Moore was gone. In his place was John Hart. The show continued. However, something was wrong. Moore didn't know why. He claimed he never inquired in his book. Some say it was a disagreement about a contract. His daughter was among those who thought Dad had possibly asked for a piece after learning about the enormous revenues from Lone Ranger products. He wasn't the kind to demand money, though, in her opinion. In contrast, Trendle thought that the mask was all that people required and that the actor didn't important. He was mistaken. Throughout that year off, continued worked. He changed his name to Clay Moore and abandoned Clayton. He portrayed the evil Graber in Radar Men from the Moon. Moore unintentionally broke the lead actor's nose during a fight scene in the low-budget drama. Alongside the original Lois Lane, Phyllis Coates, he also starred in Jungle Drums of Africa. The bills were paid by these roles. However, they were not as exciting or well-known as being the Lone Ranger. Through 1953, Trendle had had enough. With Hart, he watched all 52 episodes, but he wasn't impressed. He had a dull voice and a rigid heart. He leaned back in the saddle. He didn't connect with fans, and the show was losing steam. The agent who used to represent Silverheels was Moore's new one. Talks began. Moore not only came back, but he did so with a larger salary. Without a reason or a confrontation, Hart was quietly fired. Moore only needed to replace the mask to get the show back on track. Moore thereafter starred in 169 of the 221 episodes of the show. Upon his return, the chemistry with Silverheels also returned. Episodes felt natural. Once more. Furthermore, Moore continued to work after the show's conclusion on June 6, 1957. As the Lone Ranger, he appeared in public for the following 40 years. He made ads. He appeared on talk programs. Everywhere he went, the persona accompanied him. The Lone Ranger's creed was even spoken by him at ceremonies. His use of the mask was attempted to be prohibited by a court order in 1979. Moore retaliated, however, and was granted permission to continue performing the role he loved. Behind the scenes, things also altered. Businessman Jack rather contested the character's rights in 1954. Even though ABC was still airing in black and white, he not only brought Moore back, but he also used his own funds to shoot the last season in color. He thought the show had a bright future. It was also shown in cinemas by Rather. After that, there were two feature films, The Lone Ranger, 1956, which earned $1.55 million in the US, and The Lone Ranger in the Lost City. City of Gold, 1958, which was shot in Eastman color. Both became cult films and starred Moore and Silverheels. The Lone Ranger TV series ended, but Clayton Moore's fame persisted. By performing ads, he maintained the character throughout the 1960s and 1970s. Particularly noteworthy was the 1972 one for Gino's Pizza Rolls. Even his former co-star Jay Silverheels returned. The show's well-known slogan, "Who was that masked man?" was played off while they were fully costumed. This time, it was unclear who had first introduced them to pizza rolls. People adored it, and it was strange yet enjoyable. Moore's rich, recognizable voice instantly connected with the audience when he did advertisements for Aqua Velva. These advertisements were never only business to him. His duties were limited to portraying the Lone Ranger as a morally upright hero. The mask was more than just a costume for Moore. There was significance to it. His life wasn't always easy, though, behind the scenes. Sally Allen Moore remarried in August 1986, barely 6 months after losing his 43-year married wife. Connie Cravello was her name, and she had been Sally's nurse. Some folks felt uneasy about it. The union was short-lived. By 1989, it had ended. The pair did, however, make headlines for something heroic in October 1986. They assisted a driver who was hurt on a freeway in California. Even though Moore was by that point in his 70s, he went in to assist. A lot like the role he performed. After the divorce, things were difficult. Moore was getting older, battling with his identity, and going through a deeply upsetting court battle. There was a startling lawsuit in August 1979. The Lone Ranger rights were owned by the Jack Rather Corporation, which obtained a court order prohibiting Moore from donning the mask in public. Moore was 65 years old. He had made many appearances for about 30 years and portrayed the Lone Ranger in 221 episodes. However, Ruther's business was preparing a new Lone Ranger film. They thought their $18 million investment would be ruined by people being confused by Moore's continuous presence. On the day of the court hearing, Moore arrived wearing a mask, a white hat, and a full cowboy attire. The judge requested that he take off his hat. Rather, Moore slipped out. He valued the mask too much. It was more than just a legal lawsuit. It was really intimate. Moore was ordered by Judge Vernon Foster to stop wearing the mask and referring to himself as the Lone Ranger in public. It was a terrible blow. The ruling was based on an archaic clause in Moore's contract as well as a previous instance in which Bela Lugosi's son was unable to retain the rights to his father's Dracula persona. Rather's attorney derogatorily referred to Moore as psychotic and too elderly to serve as the Lone Ranger during the trial. Moore subsequently described it as a slap in the face. The court acknowledged that he felt sorry for Moore, but he maintained that the law was unambiguous. It brought an end to a period that had begun in 1949. Still, Moore persisted. He collaborated on Foster Grant's sunglasses in 1980. He'd wear shades if he couldn't wear the mask. Alongside celebrities Woody Allen and Raquel Welch, he participated in their Who's Behind Those Foster Grants campaign. Though he did not wear a mask, he still donned the red scarf, blue shirt, and white hat in the commercials. Children began to associate the Lone Ranger with the man wearing sunglasses after seeing those advertisements. It was an astute move. Moore remained well known between 1980 and 1984 without violating the court's regulations. The glasses took on a new symbolic meaning. Then, in 1981, the film The Legend of the Lone Ranger was released. It went off like a bomb. With only $12 million in revenue, the $18 million movie lost $6 million. Clinton Spilsbury was a complete failure as the lead actor. Despite his appearance, he was unable to perform. The creators substituted James Keach's voice for his complete voice since his lines were so awful. Although they made an effort to hide it, reviewers discovered it. Gene Siskel made fun of the casting, claiming that the only question that would ever be asked was, who played him? It was about an hour into the film before the Lone Ranger was ever seen in uniform. It was done poorly and slowly. 2 Razzie Awards for Worst Acting went to Spilsbury. It was the end of his career. Additionally, the filmmaker, William A. Fraker, never made another film. Clayton Moore's fight was about more than simply a mask. Identity, legacy, and something much more profound were at the center. After 5 arduous years of legal battle, the man who had been the Lone Ranger since 1949 was eventually granted permission to don the mask once more in September 1984. Under the leadership of Jack Rather, the owner of the character's rights, the dispute had been dragging on since 1979. Rather abruptly dismissed the complaint on September 20, however. He passed away from cancer on November 4, a few weeks later. There were others who thought Rather had a change of heart when he faced death. The final letter was sent to Moore's agency on October 17, 1984. According to Bonita Granville Rather, Jack's widow, Clayton Moore was once more permitted to don the Lone Ranger mask. Suddenly, the altercation was ended. Moore had not, however, waited in silence. He managed to maintain the image ingeniously despite being prohibited from wearing the mask. Instead, he wore Foster Grant's sunglasses that wrapped over his head. Their ad campaign even featured him as a star. The general populace adored it. He was on the show Real People in 1980. His opportunity to speak was cut short by the prolonged and loud clapping. The fans supported him. Petitions with over 1 million signatures. He got 500,000 letters himself. In 1982, 2 years prior to the case's conclusion, Moore was admitted into the Stuntman's Hall of Fame. It paid tribute to both his moniker, King of the Serials, and his beginnings as a trapeze artist. Then, in 1990, the event that determined his position in Western history occurred. In Oklahoma City, he was admitted into the Hall of Great Western Performers on March 15. He joined the likes of Gary Cooper and John Wayne. In the same year, he was honored with the Western Heritage Award. His Golden Boot Founders Award came in 1998, which commemorated his career in Westerns. These accolades were given to him for his character, not merely his performance. Moore used to say, "I became a better person because I played him." He actually lived up to the Lone Ranger's code. He brought up Tonto, played by Jay, his former co-star on film, at each awards show. Silver-heeled shoes. Together, they had produced more than 200 movies and TV shows. However, in 1987, one of the greatest accolades was given. The Hollywood Walk of Fame awarded Moore a star on June 5. However, this was no ordinary star. Clay Moore, the Lone Ranger, it said. The dual names on a single star has never been permitted for any other actor. It was the first time it was done. He arrived that day fully costumed. Comics, lunchboxes, and silver toy weapons were brought by fans for autographs. One of the largest crowds ever recorded for a Walk of Fame ceremony was present. His star is still one of Hollywood Boulevard's most frequented. He received his mask back in 1984, the same year that more items were added to Old Town Newhall's Western Walk of Fame. Icons like Clint Walker and John Wayne were standing next to him. In 2004, his well-known black mask was added to the Smithsonian's collection. After winning the court case, he wore the same one. That basic piece of plastic and linen turned into a representation of justice. Moore as the Lone Ranger on his horse, Silver, was featured on a 44-cent stamp issued by the USPS in 2009. National acclaim like that was rarely given to actors. In his 1996 book I Was That Masked Man, Moore detailed his life's events, from landing the part in 1949 to the lawsuit that attempted to strip him of it. "I am the Lone Ranger, Mr. Trendle," he wrote, and that's how he landed the part. And he meant it. The suffering of not being able to wear the mask was detailed in the book. He referred to it as a slap in the face. However, he also spoke about the support, the goodwill of his admirers, the letters, and the fact that he had no resentment against those who attempted to stop him. The Lone Ranger's creed, that all men are equal and that one person may make a difference, was something he reminded everyone of throughout the 1996 book tour. Western aficionados loved the book because it was so realistic and not just because of the stories. Moore played more than just a hero. He had one. In his private life, Clayton Moore experienced both happiness and sorrow. He had 4 spouses. He was married to Sally Allen for the longest time, from 1943 to 1986. Dawn Angela was their lone daughter. He remarried after Sally's passing, but their relationships ended. Then, in 1992, he married Clarita Petroni at the age of 77. There was a difference this time. It was peace. The two lived together in his Calabasas house in peace and love. He began to lose his reputation, but he had discovered what he needed: a person who understood him. Clarita talked about his final days in public after his death. "It was hard to watch his body deteriorate," she added. She said, "You wouldn't believe this was once the man who wore the mask," since she was crying. His bold, muscular features had waned. He had always shielded his image despite having thin, pale skin. He remained invisible without his mask even in his 80s. He wished for people to recall the hero rather than the weakness. He did, however, eventually let someone in. As he lay in a hospital bed in his last moments, he grabbed for Clarita's hand. His body hardly functioned. He reached out even though he was having trouble breathing. He was unwilling to part with her, life, and the things that were important to him. There was more to that moment than words could express. He was trying to console someone else despite the fact that he was going to die. It was Clayton Moore. The Lone Ranger was that person. Moore's heart attack occurred at home on December 28, 1999. He was sent to a San Fernando Valley hospital in a hurry, but it was too late. He was 85 years old. It was shortly before the new century, shortly after Christmas. It seemed meaningful in timing. A period was over. "I still want to have my white hat on when I take off to that big ranch in the sky," he had once stated. He did in a sense. Still carrying the legacy he created, he was laid to rest. He abandoned his daughter Dawn and his wife Clarita. Above all, though, he left a mythology in his wake. One based not only on movies and TV series but also on his own life. He filmed The Lone Ranger for 169 episodes. He appeared on innumerable occasions. However, he also motivated millions to live honorably, bravely, and compassionately.